The air in the courtroom was a sterile, suffocating blend of stale cologne and fear. I, Ethan Riley, 30 years old, stood publicly humiliated as the judge signed the final decree on my failed Soho development. The number $3.5 million was a brand seared into my professional skin. My architectural firm, my father's legacy, was functionally dead. That same afternoon, a black embossed envelope arrived at my sterile, lonely Brooklyn apartment. It was a summons to the Vance estate, the towering glass fortress on the Upper East Side. I drove there in a daze, past the immaculate, indifferent crowds of New York City, feeling like a ghost. Eleanor Vance, the legendary corporate titan, was waiting. She was 55, statuesque, and silent. A stroke had stolen her voice, leaving her only to communicate through a small, dry erase board. But her eyes, cold and sharp as polished obsidian, spoke volumes. I was barely seated when she wrote, her penmanship aggressive, "I know your $3.5 million liability, your disgrace." The exposure was brutal. I felt a desperate primal urge to flee, but the debt anchored me to the expensive leather chair. She wasn't seeking pity. She was assessing the precise depth of my ruin. She wrote again, slowly, deliberately. "I need a loyal partner, a husband, someone whose honor is broken but whose integrity is intact, someone I can rebuild." The word husband hung in the thick air, suffocating me with its impossibility. I was a failure. She was a legend. Then came the figure, written large on the board, a number that detonated in the silence. Compensation, $200,000 per month. $200,000 every 30 days, enough to clear the debt and resurrect the Riley name. It was the only way out. "The physical contract is non-negotiable, Mr. Riley," her attorney clarified, his voice clinical. "She needs a shield against Marcus Vance. You must publicly validate her decisions. But the marriage is strategic. No love, no intimacy, not a single touch." Eleanor's dark eyes locked onto mine. There was no lust, no softness, only a fierce strategic demand. I saw a silent queen recruiting a desperate pawn for a deadly war. The terms were cold, but the prize, my father's honor, was absolute. "I accept," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "I will be your committed, trusted husband." The wedding was a masterpiece of corporate cynicism. A private, lavish affair in a Wall Street ballroom, utterly devoid of warmth. Marcus Vance, Eleanor's brother-in-law and the venomous CEO, approached me after the vows. "Enjoy the silk and the champagne, Ethan," Marcus purred, his smile tight, his eyes promising destruction. "It's all borrowed. I look forward to watching you fail again, this time on a much larger stage." I met his gaze, suppressing the urge to strike him. "I'm only here to build, Mr. Vance. You should know. Architects are very good at structural defense." That evening, the first night of our contract on the master suite on the Upper East Side, was a living thing. I entered the vast, opulent room, the heavy scent of Eleanor's perfume intensifying the absurdity of the situation. I was acutely aware of the silk of her robe, the curve of her body beneath the fine fabric. And then I saw the wooden barrier. It was a long, thin, impeccably polished panel, precisely clamped to the center seam of the king-sized mattress, running its entire length. It was crude, yet effective, the physical manifestation of the most brutal clause in our contract. I sat rigidly on my allocated side, consumed by the agonizing awareness of her presence just 3 feet away.
the silence was a torturer. Every breath she took, every subtle rustle of her silk robe was amplified in the quiet room. My mind, trained in precision and structure, screamed against the illogical proximity. We were married, bound by law and fate, yet absolutely forbidden. The irony was a source of excruciating, forbidden tension. Eleanor finally turned, her profile etched against the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the window. She picked up her board. She wrote, "You understand the rules, Ethan. The barrier is absolute." I swallowed, my throat tight. "I understand, Eleanor. I signed the contract." She didn't write for a long time. She simply reached out, her fingers gliding along the cool, smooth surface of the wooden panel. The movement was slow, deliberate, intensely focused. Her hand paused directly opposite mine, separated by the width of the barrier itself. It was a gesture of profound, silent longing, or perhaps a test of my resolve. The proximity was sexually agonizing. The emotional depth of the barrier was soul-crushing. Then, she slowly picked up the antique leather drawing tube. She slid it across the duvet, urging me to cross the boundary. She wrote, "This is the only thing permitted to cross the divide tonight. Open it." I carefully unrolled the brittle, aged blueprint. It wasn't a corporate financial plan. It was the detailed structural schematic for the Architects Integrity Fund, IAF, a secret nonprofit. She wrote her final command for the night, her eyes piercing mine across the impossible distance. "It's our first night. Review every line. Its survival is now your commitment. I need you to love its purpose more than you fear its cost." I spent the rest of the night rigid, my mind consumed by the mission hidden within the lines of the blueprint. The wooden barrier remained untouched, yet the intensity of our shared purpose, the conspiracy we now embarked upon, had forged an intimacy far more powerful than any fleeting touch could provide. My life became a carefully constructed lie. By day, I was the assertive, polished Ethan Vance, accompanying Eleanor to high-stakes board meetings at Vance & Co. I was her voice, translating the fierce strategic intent of her written commands into confident, unassailable public presentations. Marcus watched me with mounting, barely contained rage. He knew I was the reason his attempts to declare Eleanor incompetent were failing. By night, I was her trustee and silent accomplice. The $200,000 monthly compensation, my price for this gilded confinement, was funneled directly into the AIF's covert legal fund. I learned to anticipate Eleanor's needs before she could write them down. I could read the minute tension in her shoulders, the subtle hardening of her gaze, intimate cues that allowed me to predict her complex corporate strategies. This silent language was the truest form of connection I had ever known. One evening, after I had successfully deflected a legal ambush by Marcus, I returned home exhausted. Eleanor was waiting. She didn't write a command. She wrote a single, direct question that felt like a probe into my soul. "Do you still regret Chloe, Ethan?" The vulnerability of the query was stunning. I walked over to my side of the bed, sat down beside the ever-present barrier, and met her steadfast gaze. "Regret Chloe? No, Eleanor," I confessed, the words raw on my tongue. "I regret the debt, I regret the failure, but she showed me that I was building my life on a foundation of sand. You showed me that a life built on purpose, even a secret, dangerous purpose, is concrete. I regret nothing. A rare, almost painful softness entered her eyes. She reached out, her hand hovering just over the polished wood of the barrier. It was a silent, powerful gesture of mutual, forbidden longing. The physical distance was absolute, but the emotional tension between us was an unbearable, charged force. You have fulfilled your obligation to your father's honor, she wrote. You could have left once the debt was paid. Why do you stay? Because the mission is not finished. Because my name is now tied to yours, Eleanor. Because I believe in the AIF more than I believed in my own firm. And because I paused, looking directly into her eyes, breaking the contract's unstated rule against emotional honesty. Because you need me, and that is a foundation I can trust.
The cold reality of our war was soon upon us. Marcus, furious that my presence had stalled his corporate coup, struck viciously at Eleanor's personal finances. He used his influence on the board to freeze all of Eleanor's accessible assets, citing her health as grounds for incompetence. The AIF's funding dried up overnight. My $200,000 monthly compensation was instantly terminated. Marcus arrived at the penthouse, oozing triumph. The funding stops now, Ethan, he sneered, tossing the legal notice onto the table. Your contract is void. Your debt is paid. Take your initial earnings and disappear back to your Brooklyn apartment. Your little mission is over. I felt a blinding panic, not for myself, but for the small firms the AIF protected. Without immediate funds, their legal defenses would collapse. I looked at Eleanor. Her silence was absolute, but the fierce fire in her eyes told me everything. This was the ultimate test. My contract is not void, Mr. Vance, I stated, the authority in my voice surprising even myself. My allegiance is not dictated by your money. My integrity dictates my actions. I walked to my safe and produced the bank statements showing my accumulated savings. I am allocating my entire personal capital, the money earned from the first months, to the Architect's Integrity Fund for the next 4 months. The mission continues, Mr. Vance. You lose. Marcus stared, his jaw slack. He had anticipated greed. He found sacrifice. He stormed out, defeated by an act of financial self-immolation. Eleanor, emotionally spent but victorious, looked at me. Her hands were shaking violently. She reached out, and this time she deliberately pressed her palm against the wooden barrier directly opposite mine. She wrote a single, profound word: Amana, sacred trust. The word was a silent, powerful benediction. That night, I spent hours comforting her, my hand pressed against the wood directly opposite hers. The barrier felt like a sacred altar. The contract was broken, not by lust, but by an act of pure financial self-sacrifice, sealing an intimacy that was absolute. My sacrificial act cemented our bond forever. We were co-conspirators, bound by duty and devotion. But the toll on Eleanor was terminal. The prolonged stress of the silent war had accelerated her illness. Her vibrant energy was fading rapidly. I spent my days as her devoted caretaker, my nights kneeling by her bedside, holding her hand, the touch now a desperate, necessary anchor. The wooden barrier remained in the master suite, a painful, ironic monument to the contract we had both transcended. In her final days, we focused on the endgame. I discovered, using cryptic notes she had written in the margin of the AIF's original blueprint, a hidden, unlisted warehouse in Queens, a secret asset Marcus knew nothing about. Eleanor, now communicating only through a soft squeeze of my hand and a faint, trembling script, wrote the final command: liquidate the Queen's asset covertly. Use the capital to purchase undeniable forensic proof of Marcus's massive corporate fraud. I executed the sale, and with the funds, acquired undeniable forensic evidence of Marcus's decades-long crimes. But the victory was bittersweet. Eleanor was too weak to celebrate. On the final night of our 1-year contract, I sat by her side. She handed me a new document, her eyes filled with immense love and regret. She wrote, "My time is over, Ethan, but your future is safe. Sign here." It was not a final will. It was adoption papers. She had secretly initiated the process months ago using a small loophole in corporate law that validated the adoption based on my service as her legal consort. By this ultimate act of love and strategic genius, she neutralized any challenge Marcus could ever raise. I was her legal heir, her son, and the undisputed steward of her mission. Tears streamed down my face, wetting the adoption papers. She had protected my future and my integrity until her final breath. She ensured my place in her life was eternal, not merely transactional. She wrote one last heartbreaking sentence, her eyes filled with peaceful finality. "Thank you, my son. Build." A few hours later, as the cold, indifferent light of dawn broke over Manhattan, Eleanor Vance passed away. I was holding her hand, the contact now sanctified by a shared history of impossible sacrifice and profound, unspoken love. The immediate legal fallout was explosive. Marcus, confident he would inherit everything, immediately challenged the will, but his attack was brutally crushed by 2 documents: the adoption papers and the undeniable forensic evidence of his own crimes, which I presented to the federal authorities. Marcus was ruined, charged with corporate fraud, and disappeared from the face of New York finance. I, Ethan Riley, the architect who started with $3.5 million in debt, inherited not a corporation but a mission far greater than myself. True to Eleanor's final wish, the majority of her immense wealth was liquidated and channeled entirely into the Architects Integrity Fund, AIF, establishing it as a permanent, legally unassailable endowment. I am now the foundation's chairman. My work is not to design towers, but to build legal and financial defenses for small firms who are defrauded. I fulfilled the profound promise I signed on that sacred blueprint. I found a love with Eleanor that was silent, strategic, and unconditional, a devotion forged in shared sacrifice and a common, honorable purpose. I found my true honor not in clearing my personal debt, but in committing to a mission far larger than my own career. The wooden barrier rests today in a dedicated archive at the AIF offices, a powerful, daily reminder that the most profound forms of intimacy are often built not on physical passion, but on absolute trust, shared silence, and the commitment to a sacred contract. My 1-year contract with Eleanor ended, but my lifetime contract with her vital legacy has only just begun. I am Ethan Riley, and I am finally building a future that is truly concrete.